Hi, Jack. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you for having me. I appreciate this early hour for me, late hour for you, but I'm really glad to be here, so thank you.
Yeah, you're on the other side. You're in
I'm
Seattle.
in Seattle,
Yeah.
almost, well, you're a little bit north and east of me. You're the first person I've ever known who's lived in Nova Scotia, Uh,
Well, I'm not originally a Maritimer. I come from Toronto, but I ended up here in my
okay.
retirement. So,
Okay.
and
All right.
I've been to Seattle. I just don't remember much. It was 1974. I was just passing through. I
Yeah.
remember liking
Yeah.
it, but yeah, cool.
Yeah. It's changed a lot since 74.
I bet. I
It's
bet.
become cosmopolitan and
Mm.
and quite wealthy, which is has its benefits but also its drawbacks. It's a good art center, however.
Yeah, my son likes it down there. He lives in Vancouver, so
Oh
he
yeah,
passes through Seattle quite a bit.
yeah.
He used to be in a band as well, and he toured the West Coast quite a lot. He played in Seattle a lot.
Mhm.
Now I'm looking over here, and you have 36 books just on
Yes,
Amazon alone.
just on Amazon. Yes, alone.
That's quite the achievement right there. And
Yeah.
of course, we're not going to talk about all 36 of them. We don't have the time
No.
for that. You're going to pick out one or two or three, however many you want to talk about.
Okay. Okay.
Before we get there, though, Jack, I find it fascinating to hear about people's lives, their
Okay.
backstory. So why don't you tell us yours?
Okay. Well, from birth to now has been quite a journey. I've lived in South America. I've lived in all, I think, 13 states. I've gone to multiple high schools. I used to speak three or four languages. I only speak one now. But I spent some time in South America where I really learned about cultural diversity. And that experience has shaped my political life in a sense. I became very active at the local level in Seattle. I've taught at the university. I taught in the screenwriting department. I've taught novels. I've also worked underground. I've been a tunnel rat. I've been a social worker, a grammar school teacher, trying to find all those things that would somehow unlock the key to understanding, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, what it means to be human. Um, I've developed through time somewhat of a pessimistic view of human beings, and I have a little phrase: the hard part is being human. If we can overcome that, we can accomplish some really great things. So all of that experience that I have had has had an impact on the way I write and what I write. I've tried to not write memoir so much as to write novels that draw on some of those experiences and bring them to life through characters. And so a number of my books, well, I have one book that's called One Year in the Time of Violence, which is a memoir novel that combines two separate journeys to South America at the time of the Colombian Civil War called La Violencia. And it was very much like what has gone on in other parts of the world where they were killing one another for political reasons. Through that, I came to write another novel called Blood, which extrapolated from people I knew and put them into a context of being corporate sort of hitmen, and then discovering that what Mitch was doing was not what he really wanted to do. Then I wrote another novel called Gabriella and the Widow, which is it's a woman's book in the sense that I looked at the lives of women in two different cultures and said, what would happen if I put them together? And so I bring Gabriela out of Mexico and I bring her up to the west, to the El Norte, they call it, where she meets a 92-year-old widow who's on her last legs. And I sort of bring the two cultures together in a very subliminal and I think political way to say, what happens if we do merge peacefully? What happens if we do get together and not have a good time, but come to understand one another. Uh, I also spent some time on the farm in Kansas with my grandparents, and so I wrote a novel about that called Lemon Custard, which is about a woman who gets tired of living on the farm and being a breed animal and leaves her family, leaves her children, leaves her husband, goes to the city and discovers her new life. And for that novel, I took a lot of flack because in the end, she finds another man that she falls in love with and she rids her life and she gets her kids back. And I got some flack because that wasn't a very strong feminist notion of a woman finding her future with a new man.
Hmm.
Uh, the 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 California Quartet, which is four novels that span a whole long range, is kind of my homage both to a state where I spent a lot of time and had a lot of good experiences, and also it's an homage to the coming of age of an American in a really critical, crucial time, which was, the 70s when things were falling apart. The last book that I wrote is called Man Alone, and that is a book that I have written because I asked myself the question, what in the world is happening to men in our culture today? Why are the corporations saying that it's not worth it to get a college education because the trade-off is not, financially right? And I keep thinking, but that's not the purpose of a college education. Yeah, maybe it's okay to train you to do stuff, but it's not opening your mind. And so in this novel called Man Alone, the protagonist is a guy named Zine, and he is lost. He's been through hell. He's had a personal crisis here and a personal crisis there, and he's been up and he's been down, and he's looking for love and he's looking for meaning. And it just is sort of an attempt to look at the shape that American men are in, and I can only write about American men. I can't write about Canadian men, but I get the feeling that some of this is the same thing. Canada, United States, Great Britain, South America, young men are lost. There doesn't seem to be any place for them that is satisfying and meaningful. And I think that's why so many of them turn to sort of the wrong political direction, that they're looking for some meaning, some way to connect to something, and they can't find it. So that kind of
Mm.
covers the novels
Yeah.
and my life at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that these are autobiographical novels, and they're certainly not memoir, but what they do is take my experience in these various cultures that I've lived in and try to find meaning there. And it's equally hard to find meaning whether you're living in in Ecuador or Peru or Colombia or Mexico or Seattle. I mean, what in the world are we doing to our men and women the same way? And I mean, there's something terrible is happening to us.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
almost like we have become resigned to our own extinction and we just continue to mess it up. And
Yeah.
I don't think that we do that deliberately. I think it's just entropy, I guess. We just, keep going and keep doing it.
Yeah.
So, oh, that's quite
Well,
a burden to lay on you,
oh,
John.
no, no, it's good. I'm with you. I'm with you. I tend to agree in principle. Um, there are those who have the same message, who
Hmm.
I'm sure don't have your same political leanings,
Hmm.
and they say men are jeopardized and we got to do something about men's rights.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
in fact, there's men's rights organizations and people like incels love that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
That's not what you're talking about.
No, no,
No.
no.
So the distinction has to be made there. I think there's a lot of anxiety leading to depression. There's a mental health crisis in both of our countries.
Oh, I agree. I
And
agree.
I covered that subject as well in my fictional writing. Is I do the same
Hmm.
thing. My characters speak for me. All my
Hmm.
characters have a little bit of me in them. Is that how
Sure.
you look at it as well?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, I taught in a screenwriting program at the UW, at University of Washington, and what the idea of the whole of an actor, and you know this, I know from your art background, the idea of being an actor is to take your own experience and somehow project it onto the character so that you become the character, as the character, excuse me, the actor becomes the character. Stanislavski calls it the method acting, or Meisner the method acting. And let's extrapolate for a moment to a novelist. You're a novelist, you're a story writer, you have more than one character in your novel, right? Well, you have to become all of those characters as a writer. Actors have it easy. The writer has it terrible because you got to be nine different characters. And if some of them are crazy, you're going to be crazy too. It's just part of it, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
So I think that your idea that, yes, these characters are all me, but they're also more than me. They're
absolutely.
more of who I think I am and what I have become and what I can become, and my anger is their anger, and on and on like that. So I think that I'm pulling a little bit hard on this one, but I think that being a writer teaches you really something about your own psyche. At the same time, it lets you see the broader range of human behavior. And so, like in Blood, Mitch, my character, Mitch, is a serial killer. I mean, he's a contract killer for corporations, and he cuts the ears off his victims because he gets paid by the ear.
Hmm.
Well, I've never cut a guy's ear off, and I don't know anybody who has ever cut a guy's ear off, but I can still imagine that as an aspect of my character. And so I say to myself, well, Jack, are you a serial killer hiding behind this facade of a writer? I say, well, yeah, maybe. But,
Well, I don't know. I have characters in my book that, first of all, are women, and so I have to
okay.
think, and various ages.
Yeah.
Women in their 60s, 70s. I have teenagers, 17-year-old girls. I had to
Yeah.
talk to my wife about like, so how would a 17-year-old girl talk about this particular subject?
Yes.
Because I've
Yes.
never been a 17-year-old girl.
Yeah.
And then I've got homosexual people in there. I'm not
Yeah.
homosexual, so I don't want to. It's important that they are gay. It makes sense in the story,
Sure.
but at the same time, I don't want to overstep my bounds here and
Yeah.
start making
Well,
caricatures.
yeah, a writer friend named Nicole Disney. She is gay. She lives in Denver, Colorado. She's also a martial artist. And I said, well, Nicole, you're writing these lesbian novels. She says, no, no, I write novels in which there are lesbian characters. And
Right.
I think that's what you are saying,
That's right. Yeah.
So it's sort of a very touchy thing, but that's an aspect, I think, of the range of human behavior that we have to acknowledge and not punish.
Hmm.
And we have to acknowledge the diversity of human being, and instead of trying to cleanse the world of all the brown skinned people, I mean,
Yeah.
let's accept that, you see. And I think you approach that very gently there. I'm not homosexual, but I write about homosexual characters,
Yeah.
and I think that's what Nicole is doing,
Yeah.
you know.
Without turning them into caricatures or what you would expect,
Oh, exactly,
it's
exactly.
it's a gentle, careful road you have to walk.
Yes, you have to be that way. Another aspect of something that I'm not dwelling on, but I'm drilling into in this new novel that I'm working on. Okay, is the the broken character not because of anything that has happened to him, but because of one of the tricks of DNA, recombinant DNA. One of the characters is autistic. Now, I know there's a lot of writing about autistic characters these days, but they actually now in the language they call them non-atypical or atypical, neuroatypical, as opposed to neurotypical. And it dawned on me that these people have been in the culture forever. And way we see this is when you and I were in high school, there were probably guys who walked around with uh, pocket protectors and a lot of pins in their shirt pocket and a slide rule on their belt, and we called them nerds.
Yeah,
Well, they own the world now,
that's
John.
right. The geeks shall inherit the earth.
So here they were, but the world had not been invented that they could live in. And I think
Yeah.
our autistic characters are in the same place. They're living in a world that has not yet been created for them. And so they're uncomfortable. They seem broken.
Mm,
They seem hurt. And yet many of those people are brilliant. You know,
yeah.
they're mathematicians, they're scientists, they've got photographic memories. And
Yes.
that's all aspect of autism that we can't accept because we got this very narrow band of normality,
Hmm.
you know. And I think as a writer, I am duty bound to bring those characters to the forefront and make them part of the spectrum of humanity. You know,
Yeah.
that's I think what I'm trying to do is,
Yeah.
and so that I think fits with the whole notion of what is wrong with men. Well, if a boy is 16 and he is neuroatypical, he cannot study history, but boy, is he good in math. Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the beautiful aspects of the mind as it distinguishes each character, each person from the one next to him. And let's celebrate diversity instead of punishing it.
Yeah.
And I know that Canada is a lot more open than we are down here, where we're building razor fences and rivers to keep children from coming from depression, I mean, from oppression to a place where they might lead a life that could be productive. You know,
Hmm.
I mean, oh, how awful is that, John?
Yeah.
How awful is
Yeah.
that? You know,
I found that I needed to research, and obviously, when you're writing a novel and you've got characters in there that you are not. For instance, I have a character who is a savant, and
hmm
he appears in the first book, and then becomes a major character in the second and third
hmm
book. In the third book, I needed him to break down. I needed something to go wrong in his
hmm
life, just so that at the end it gets better, of course,
hmm
because you need conflict, obviously. Well, I don't know what goes wrong in a savant's life, the pros and cons of savant living. And just put that into Google and search it, and there's all kinds of different articles I could read about the pros of being a savant versus the cons. And so then when I read that, I created a situation in the third book that something goes wrong in his life that's
hmm
in keeping with the possibility of something going wrong in a savant's life. And so I
Yes, right.
hopefully I made it realistic.
Well, that's a good way to go about it. I think that the savant, they used to call them idiot savants in some way, you know, these people who could multiply 16-digit numbers in their head, you know, but couldn't read a phone book, you know, that kind of stuff. So I think that that's the right track to go, but I think it also contributes to your own growth as a writer and as a man, as a person, to see the diversity that exists in the human mind. I mean, we can discover black holes that no one can see, and we can make anti-COVID vaccines, and we can, you know, build magnificent solar structures, but we can't get along with one another. You know, I think that's the range of diversity that we have to relish as writers and bring that into the world for other people to see. So your savant character looks like a Superman in the beginning because he just knows and does everything. But he's human. He breaks. And once he breaks, how do we fix him? Can he be fixed? And the question deeper in your writing is, can we fix this guy? And boy, that's a hard question to answer. 'Cause
Yeah.
I don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do it.
I think I figured out a way. I'm a happily ever after guy. I like my books that I write all after all the struggle, after all the things that seem like it's not going to get solved, it does in the end. So
Yeah.
I guess I'm giving away my books, but whatever.
No, no, I think that we have to see, I think in the screenwriting world, they always talked about you got to have a little bit of hope. You got to hope that things will be better, that we can resolve these problems. We can solve the issue of the broken savant or the neuroatypical autistic kid, who, we've got to solve those problems, and I think that the solution might be in the notion of hope and a clear, clean future where you can be yourself and make your contribution. Let's go back one step. Maybe what's missing, it just occurs to me as I'm saying this, maybe what's missing in the lives of young men right now is a sense of contribution. They don't think there's anything that they can give. They're worthless. There's nothing that they can do that makes sense. So they go out and, join this clique or that clique or this group of political activists or whatever, trying to make a contribution. And that gets me to one of the big themes that I see working right now cross culturally, and that's the notion of family. Most of my writers that I work with in the interactive rewriting thing are writing about family, father, son, mother, daughter, groups of people that they belong to. I hear it all the time. A football player gets drafted and he goes to a team and he says, "We're like family, they treat us like family." And so he's looking for family, you know, you join the army and we're like family. And I say, well, what is this drive? What is this drive that makes us need to belong and be part of something and contribute to the family? I think it's pretty deep in us. I think I hate to use the word genetically determined, but you know, that seems to be a drive that we have to make a contribution to help other people in a way. And I'm being idealistic at the extreme here. And if you don't acknowledge that, then you wind up in the slough of despond and pessimistic life. And I think you're positive thinking there when you say, I'll make them end happily. I can make my contribution that way. That's good. That's
Mm.
good. I appreciate that.
I wish life were that simple. Just, yeah. Uh,
Well, we can make it simple in the
yeah.
novels, can't we?
Yeah, sure. Of course we could. Here in Canada, we have a political spectrum as well. It's
Uh-huh.
not that different, except we have more choices. We have extreme right, we have extreme left, and we have several political parties to choose from. But the
Hmm.
divisions are there.
Hmm.
We have a much smaller population, so you don't hear the loud voices as much. But they're
Hmm.
there. They're there.
Yeah.
And what I'm getting at is through politics, everybody seems to have a solution as to how to improve the family. Nobody's anti-family, whether you're
Right.
extreme right or
Right.
left. Everyone's
Right.
pro-family, but they have different ideas how to maintain it. Some even suggest that the government should step in and do this, that, and the other thing.
Hmm.
And then the other ones say that's government overreach. And then sometimes when they say that's government overreach, and then they suggest something that is in fact government overreach,
Hmm.
it gets very confusing. What's your take on all that?
Yeah, I think the word is confusing.
Yeah.
That is the big word. It is confusing because everybody's got a solution, but the solutions are not all the same. And so which one do you make? And that sort of hits a real hard issue in my mind. You walk into a store and you're going to buy toothpaste, okay? And there's 7,400 kinds of toothpaste. Which, how can you possibly choose, John? How do you choose it? So you walk into your parliament building and you've got all these spectra, members of the spectrum across the spectrum. And you say, well, which one do we choose? What are the criteria that you use to make the choice to make it better? I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea, I do know this. No, that's not true. I do know that I love my child. I love my grandchildren. I love my wife. And the cosmologists are pretty interesting here. They talk about, wait a minute, in all of this cosmos, in all of this universe, maybe this little spot on this thing called Earth is a unique place. It's the only place where you will ever find love. And conversely, this is the bad part. This is probably the only place where you will also find evil, because the cosmos itself is just indifferent, right? I mean,
Yeah.
stars are born, they die, elements are
Yeah.
made, so that I touched a very sensitive thing in there when I started talking about the uniqueness of love on Earth. Somebody reminded me, well, then maybe evil is also the unique thing on Earth, and we just have to live with that polarity. And that's a terrible place for a writer to be. Wait a minute. Every good character I make, has his opposite, his evil twin, so to speak.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of
So,
interesting that you mentioned that because isn't that what every world religion starts with? Like there's good and there's evil, and we're going to
yeah,
explain to you why and what happens when you
sure.
die.
Yeah,
It's all very
yeah,
important,
yeah.
the
Hmm.
afterlife. But no one seems to be writing new scriptures these days. The last go at writing scriptures was the 1800s. You got Jehovah's Witness rewriting the Bible. You got the Mormon
Hmm.
religion.
Hmm.
Christian Science was born then too. It was a pretty
Hmm.
busy time. It was right after the Age of Reason, so they figured, well, the Pope can't get us, so let's just start writing up a bunch of stuff.
Yep, yep, yep.
Who's doing that today?
Boy, that's a heavy one. I think it appears to me that we're getting some rewriting, but it's kind of retrograde stuff. They're going back to what was before, and in a way that relates to writing. Lately, I've become interested in something called late style, and what happens in late style is a writer often or a musician. Edward Said wrote about Beethoven in this regard with his Opus 111, his sonata, his last 132. He said, at the time it was written, it was unlike anything that had ever been written before. It was as though he had transcended everything we knew about music and had started to do it differently. And that leads Said to think, well, maybe other writers are doing this as well.
Hmm,
The problem when you get to late style, and this I think bears on what we were just talking about, in late style, you cannot solve the problems that arise using the old techniques that you used to use. You have to discover new techniques. It's sort of like inventing a car as you're building it. You don't know what it's going to be until you get to it. And we're kind of in that same place with respect to the new ideologies. We've tried fascism, we've tried communism, we've tried capitalism, we've tried all these things. All of them bring huge numbers of problems. So we can't use the scripture from 2008 BC to predict and rewrite the future that we're going to have in the next 150 years. I think that's related. Correct me if you don't think I'm on the track there.
yeah.
So I don't think that the what they call the Christian nationalist is a solution to the problem, because it runs smack into
No,
capitalism,
I,
which
I
is
see it as a desperate attempt to hold on to something and to
okay.
institute it and to make it into law. It's
Hmm.
it's almost like they feel, well, they do feel persecuted. They think if we don't do this, it's going to all be gone. And I don't wish churches to disappear. People should be able to go and worship any way they want. So I don't know why
Sure.
they're so afraid.
Right. That's a good question. I think there's a real interesting article that just came out in the New York Review of Books where the guy says, I cut and pasted a bit of it on Facebook. He says the real problem in American society right now is the fear of failure. You know, I'll send that to you when we finish here,
Okay,
because he goes into a huge analysis of what's going on in America, and the notion of failure and why people don't try to do more because they know they're doomed to fail. And if you look at it in practical terms, well, you guys have baseball in Canada, so you are familiar with this too. The
sure.
best hitter ever in the history of baseball missed 6 out of 10 times. You
Usually they're
know,
strikeout kings too.
I mean, he failed
Yeah,
6 out of 10 times.
yeah,
And so this is the greatest baseball player, Ted
yeah.
Williams. And so how in the world can we talk about success when in fact our best people are failing 60% of the time?
Thomas Edison comes to mind with his light bulb.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
I
So,
sometimes wonder, like when you're on your 137th time for the light bulb, and you know it's well, we know it took 180 something.
right,
At some point, most people will just go, "Okay, I guess this is not working."
right. Yeah,
So
well,
what is
the
failure? Failure is
what is
actually stopping to do what you're trying to do.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, think of it as a writer, as a musician, if you didn't get something right the first time, do you just give it up or do you tackle that and see it as a problem? I think I've written about this. I stole this line from John Gardner, who was a secretary of HEW or something in the US. He says, the future is disguised as a series of unsolvable problems, you know? And
Yeah.
so what he says is, wait a minute, you've got to try to solve them, at least try,
Yeah.
because the worst you can do is fail, and then the next time you try it again. But as a musician, you know that you didn't give up the first time you fluffed that chord. You went
Yeah.
back and did it again, and you
Absolutely.
did it again, and you did it
Yeah.
again. And so failure, while yes, it may be a driving force, it still is simply one of those insoluble problems that we have to overcome in order to make some kind of progress. And that's why I really dislike myself when I say, well, maybe human beings have just become resigned to our own extinction,
Hmm.
and we seem to be progressing. And it can't be that way because every time you have a kid, you hope that things will be better for the kid. And isn't that one of the driving forces is to make our child's future better than our own present? I mean, isn't that
Yeah.
one of the big things?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Let's go back to talking about your books and
Uh,
this little side course that we had here for a little while, talking about how we feel and think.
uh-huh.
I- Is that to be found in your novels? This
Yes.
wonderful way that you think?
Yes. What
Yes.
I try to do is every novel is really about, and this, I think all writers do this too. Every novel is about what it means to and how to write a novel, and that's why I try to make all of my books different from uh, the quartet is as close as I've come to writing a series, but they're not interconnected. You can read each one, but each one is almost like it's a set of devices that I've used to make this novel that makes it different from the other novels that I have written. And so each novel becomes kind of a an example of how to write a novel. And
Hmm.
that's why it's so hard to teach novel writing. Somerset Maugham is quoted as saying, there are only 5 rules for writing a novel, but nobody knows what they are. Okay.
Yeah.
And so you're sort of strapped into that. For instance, when I was writing Man Alone, I decided to let go of 7 very specific old school, old style techniques. And I wrote a novel that is only 104 pages long, but it's as dense as anything I had ever written before because I had stripped out all the non essentials. And if you talk about non essentials, you go to poetry. In the poetic line, you want there to be no extraneous words that get in the way of the image or the action. Well, extrapolate that into a larger thing called a novel, and you then start talking about speed, depth, and clarity. How fast can, and I don't mean car chase fast, I mean, how fast can I write this so that the image pops into the reader's mind right away? you know and once you solve that as a technique, then you realize that your lines have become tighter and cleaner, fewer words saying the same thing, not the same thing, but saying what you want to say in the fewest words possible. Compression then becomes a very important part of poetic writing, and I teach something called the poetics of prose. How much of the poetry can you put into the novel without it sounding like poetry? And I came to the realization then that the screenwriting line has far more in common with a poetic line than it does with the former novelistic line. In other words, the fewer words, because screenwriters, because time is money, And these guys know that it takes you have to spend $100,000 to shoot one page of a novel of a screenplay. Time is money. Therefore, what I have to do is make this like an intelligence test. How little can I give you before you get it? In other words,
Hmm.
don't overkill. Give the minimum amount. And that's why some screenwriters say that the perfect script, the perfect movie, is almost nearly a silent movie because it's all told through action and what you see. And so this whole thing, is it possible, in fact, that movies have have rewired our brains to think in a different way about information?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I really believe they have, you
Yeah.
know.
Let me get a bearing on your writing. What is your latest book? When was it published? And when was your first book published?
Oh, my first book was a crazy novel that I wrote in about 1970, I want to say 78. It was called A Stolen House. And at that time, I was the world of experimental fiction was going full bore, all the small magazines around the world. And I was writing for a magazine called Pig Iron. And I invented some characters in this novel uh, called The Stolen House that the editor publisher Jim Villani said, well, why don't you join our staff and we'll take these characters and work on them. So they became a stay for about 4 years. I wrote a 50-page novella every 3 months, for
Hmm.
that. That was the first one. Uh, the last one is Man Alone, and that was published in August, yes, August of 2023.
Okay.
Okay, so the range goes from this crazy mixed up called The
Mm.
Stolen House to a crazy mixed up character named Zine in Man Alone,
Okay.
so
And what's the sales like for you? All through all 36 books, the sales must have been different for each one.
each one absolutely. I think the best selling book of all was the how-to book. The Weekend Novelist Writes a Mystery. Bob and I wrote that, must have been, I don't know how long ago it been, John, but we still get, royalty checks from that, and um, it's pretty much a mainstay. It appears in almost all the surveys of, how to writes,
Hmm.
because it's a, well, the subtitle is, from idea to script to finished novel in some press sometime, and it actually works. It's a very good process that a lot of writers have adopted and are using consistently. So that's probably the most successful one. The next successful one was Blood. What can I say about Blood? It's in a world all its own. This It's ostensibly about a serial killer, but really it's about man's place in the corporate world as a pawn of the powers that be. And that got a lot of really strong reviews, which helped the sales a bit. No bestsellers, of course. You know, uh, Man Alone has done pretty well, but I won't know until I hear they get the what do they call it, the monthly, the quarterly report. So I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
But you're having fun doing it.
I am. I love what I'm doing. I like being a writer. I have a little wall thing right here that says, "When not writing, I get weird." I
Well, we
love to
wouldn't want to
write.
see that.
Oh no, and I love to write with other people because I believe in sharing what I know for the greater good.
Yeah.
And that's why I teach this weekly interactive rewriting thing, because I have a book called Pieces, and what it is, it's a compendium of all the techniques that I've acquired through time, and I try to share it with writers so that they can see, well, I can't teach you how to write, but I can show you what I did and what
Hmm.
I do. And if you want to use some of those techniques, here it is.
Wow.
And well, like on this coming Tuesday, tomorrow, I'm going to be working on something that I call incantatory prose, because for the past few months I've been working, I give them a specific technique. This is a technique that you can use to induce rhythm into your sentence or into your
Mm,
well, what is a paragraph? There's the way you can use rhetoric to make it dance, how to make it sing. This is the way you use that, the other thing. So
yeah, yeah.
when I get on Tuesday, we're going to talk about incantatory prose, which is not a term that I made up, but a friend of mine who is a poet read the section of this novel called Citadel, and he said, "This is incantatory prose." And I said, "Okay, what the hell is incantatory prose?"
Well,
So
the
I
name
started
actually
looking.
defines it
Yes,
quite well.
exactly.
Yeah,
It gets almost hypnotic, you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
And so I'm going to share that with the writers, which no one has talked about to them before. They've always talked about sentences and paragraphs. So how do you make this thing sing? How do you make it flow? Feel, you got to
Ah,
feel rhythm is more important. No,
yes,
rhythm is as important as syntax. So if you can
absolutely.
make your sentence bounce up and down, and almost if you can dance to it. And I find myself when
Wow.
I'm reading poetry, I find myself tapping my foot because I'm
Yep.
keeping the beat like I'm a
Yes, yes.
I took first communion on the steps of the jazz cellar, too young to buy my own booze, too dumb to steal it. I heard Rex Roth rip the nation naked over the beat of conga drums and horns, crystal in the night. I just I'm you know, I'm singing this son of a gun.
That's excellent. Excellent.
And then
I,
I talk about rhythm and meter
yeah.
in prose, and I say, well, here's Byron, Lord John, George Gordon, Lord Byron, in the destruction of Sennacherib from the Hebrew melodies. The Assyrian came down like the wolf on the fold, and his cohort was gleaming in purple and gold, and the sheen of their spears was like stars on the sea when the blue wave is nightly o'er deep Galilee. The widows of Asher are loud on their wail, and the idols are broken, the temple of Baal, and the might of the Gentile, unsmote by the sword, has melted like snow in the glance of the Lord. I say, there's a poem that's got anapaests in
Wow.
it. What happens if you write your poetry, your prose that way?
Yeah,
Let's talk about the poetics of prose. So anyway,
absolutely. Yeah.
uh, I try to share everything I know without being directive. I will never tell her you should write this. I don't use the word should, you know. I say, why don't you try this? And if it makes it better, then it does. If it doesn't, junk it. So I have 5 little rules, not rules, but techniques. Okay. If you don't like this sentence, paraphrase it, cut it, move it, turn it into prose, turn it into narration. If it's in dialogue, turn it into dialogue if it's in narration. And son of a gun, it just shapes, it massages the whole piece. But helping writers discover that there's a flexibility in this beautiful language that just does all these wonderful things. You can help them then overcome so much of their doubt. Doubt, fear, and shame, doubt, guilt, and shame are 3 of the worst things that can afflict a writer. Well,
Hmm.
I don't know if it's any good. Will people like it? You know,
Yeah.
uh, I doubt myself. No, don't doubt. You just write the sentences,
Hmm.
see if they work.
Yeah.
You know. I have a little sweatshirt. No, when I was teaching a class, John, I'm rapping. Well, I get wound up when I start doing poetry. Okay, but
Hmm.
I was teaching this class, and at one point, the student said, "Well, why do you write?" And I thought about it, and I said, "Well, I write so I have something to rewrite." And they gave me a sweatshirt, a T-shirt at the end that says, "Why do I write? So I have something to rewrite."
Yeah,
And
sure.
and
Yeah,
the art is in the rewrite. You know that.
absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely
Abs
it is.
uh, you know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. Perfect.
Well, we got to wrap it up. It's been quite a challenge for me to edit
It's
this, but
it's
it's going to be a
it's
lot of fun.
it's been fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
I knew it would be. I hope my note that I sent you saying that I'd be here. I said, yeah, I be there mit bated breath breath. And I wanted to explain to you that sometimes I think of it as my spellerator sometimes goes on strike and tosses up a language. I don't know what's going to come out.
All right, Jack. Have yourself a wonderful day. And if you write more, and I'm sure you're going to,
No, I will.
let's
I
do this all
will.
over again.
I would love to. This has
All
been
right.
very enjoyable. Oh, one last thing, John, I
Sure.
wanted to say.
Okay.
Um, the notion of a podcast is such a delightful piece because what it allows us to do is to connect the art community through time and space in ways that we could not have imagined 20 years ago.
Easily. You're right.
I mean, here you are, a novelist in Nova Scotia. I'm a novelist in Seattle, and we're conversing in real time instead of waiting for the letter to arrive 3 weeks later by the
That's
time
right.
you've already solved the problem. So
I'm
I
I'm gonna,
really,
I'm going to be speaking to somebody in Tasmania and India
oh,
and the
wonderful. That's
Philippines
great.
and Germany and
It's
France and
wonderful. It's
plenty of people in
wonderful.
England. It's the
Yeah.
world's small when you think about it.
Yes. Yep. And it's just so miraculous that we can do this and
Yeah.
understand one another. So I want to thank you for
Okay.
being the keystone in this whole thing. It's
Well,
so important.
you're
So
welcome.
important.
And thank you for
Okay,
being
my
a
friend.
guest on the show. It was a
Well,
pleasure.
thank you for having me.
All right.
Okay. Bye.
Take care. Thank you for watching. If you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then please consider hitting that like button and leaving a comment. You could also subscribe and ring that bell because I release 2 episodes per week, one on Wednesdays and one on Saturdays. And if you are an author, I would love to hear from you. Until such time, keep on writing and be kind to one another.